The wind atop the roof of the nondescript apartment building was remarkably cold, despite the late afternoon sun hanging low in the sky. It whipped around the boy, tugging at the collar of his middle school uniform, chilling the sweat that clung to his brow. Izuku Midoriya stood paralyzed. His knuckles were white, trembling as he gripped the fabric of his pants. His emerald eyes, usually vast and bright with an insatiable hunger for the heroic and the extraordinary, were currently shrunk to terrified pinpricks. A few feet away stood his god. His idol. The pillar upon which his entire worldview, his entire reason for breathing, had been built. All Might. The symbol of peace. Only the man standing before him was no longer the towering, muscle-bound titan of justice that adorned every poster in Izuku's bedroom. He was a skeleton wrapped in baggy clothes, a frail, withered man coughing up blood into the palm of his hand. Izuku's heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against his ribs. The question he had held onto for 10 years, the question that had kept him going through the bullying, the taunts, the spider lilies left on his desk, and the mocking laughter of Katsuki Bakugo, hung in the air between them like a physical weight. Can someone without a quirk be like you? Can even a quirkless person become a hero? Izuku had closed his eyes when he asked it. He had bowed his head, terrified of the answer, yet desperate for a single thread of hope. He had needed, the man who saved everyone with a smile to look at him and say the words his mother couldn't. All Might wiped the blood from his chin, his sunken blue eyes looking at the trembling 10-year-old boy with a mixture of profound pity and weary resignation. Pro-heroes are always having to risk their lives. All Might's voice was raspy, devoid of the booming charisma that usually defined it. Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. So, can you be a hero? Not without a quirk. The words didn't just break Izuku's heart, they shattered the very foundation of his reality. It felt as though the concrete roof beneath his red sneakers had suddenly vanished, sending him plummeting into an endless, suffocating abyss. If you want to help people, All Might continued, his voice softening, perhaps sensing the catastrophic damage his words were inflicting, you could become a police officer. They get crap because the heroes capture most of the villains, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you have to consider what's realistic. With those final, agonizing words, the gaunt figure of Toshinori Yagi turned and walked toward the stairwell. The heavy metal door opened with a screech of rusted hinges and closed with a dull, hollow thud. Izuku was alone. He didn't scream. He didn't drop to his knees in a dramatic display of agony. He simply stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city of Mizurufu in bruised shades of purple and bleeding orange. Realistic. The word echoed in his mind, bouncing around his hollowed-out chest. All his life, he had been told to be realistic. The doctor with the thick glasses who casually explained the extra joint in his pinky toe. The teachers who looked the other way when Bakugo singed his uniform. The classmates who treated him like an untouchable pariah. Even his own mother, weeping as she held him, apologizing over and over again instead of telling him he could do it. They were all right. And Izuku was wrong. A choked, ugly sob finally tore its way up his throat. Tears, hot and fast, spilled over his freckled cheeks, dripping off his chin to stain the gray concrete below. His knees gave out. He collapsed, clutching his chest as he gasped for air. It's over, he thought, the finality of it wrapping around his throat. It was a stupid dream. I'm just a Deku. I'm nothing. Izuku didn't remember walking down the stairs. He didn't remember exiting the building. The city around him was a blur of neon lights, honking cars, and the murmuring of crowds. Mizurufu was a bustling metropolis, alive with the energy of a superhuman society. Everywhere he looked, there were reminders of what he lacked. A man used a telekinesis quirk to effortlessly carry 6 bags of groceries. A woman with shimmering scales for skin laughed with her friends at a cafe. On a massive jumbotron above the intersection, a news anchor eagerly reported on the latest exploits of the pro-hero Kamui Woods. To Izuku, it all felt like a mockery. He was a ghost drifting through a world of the living. A statistical anomaly. A relic of human evolution left behind in the dust. He walked aimlessly, his head hung low, his vibrant green hair casting a dark shadow over his eyes. He didn't want to go home. He couldn't face his mother right now. If she saw his face, she would know. She would know that the fragile illusion he had been clinging to for the past 6 years had finally been broken. The brightly lit commercial districts gradually gave way to older, narrower streets. The pristine sidewalks turned cracked and uneven, littered with discarded wrappers and cigarette butts. The towering glass skyscrapers were replaced by cramped, dilapidated apartment complexes and shuttered storefronts. Izuku wasn't paying attention to where he was going. The tears had stopped falling, replaced by a numb, hollow ache that made his limbs feel like lead. He turned down a narrow alleyway, intending to take a shortcut to a nearby park where he could hide in the dark until he found the strength to put on a fake smile and go home. The alley was suffocatingly narrow, flanked by towering brick walls that blocked out the glow of the street lamps. The smell of damp mold, rotting garbage, and stale beer hung heavy in the air. Well. Look what wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Izuku froze. The numbness evaporated, instantly replaced by a spike of icy adrenaline. He looked up. Blocking the exit of the alley were 3 men. They were older, perhaps in their late 20s, dressed in ragged, mismatched clothing. The one who had spoken stepped forward. He was tall, dangerously thin, with skin that had a sickly, grayish pallor. His eyes were entirely black, lacking irises or pupils. He grinned, and as he raised his hand, Izuku watched in horror as the man's fingernails elongated, sharpening into foot-long, jagged metallic blades. To his left was a heavier man with a snout like a boar, small tusks protruding from his lower jaw. To the right was a short, twitchy man whose hands were currently engulfed in a faint, crackling aura of blue electricity. Nice uniform, the bladed man sneered, taking another step forward. The metal claws scraped against the brick wall, sending a shower of sparks and a horrifying screech echoing through the alley. Looks a little rich for this part of town, kid. What's in the yellow backpack? Mom and Dad give you a fat allowance? Izuku took a step back, his breath hitching. Villains? No, just thugs. Muggers. But to a 10-year-old quirkless boy, there was no difference. They were predators, and he was prey. I don't have any money, Izuku stammered, his voice cracking. He backed up, only to feel his heel hit a discarded wooden pallet. He was trapped. The alley was a dead end behind him, blocked by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Don't lie to us, you little brat, the boar-faced man grunted, cracking his knuckles. Just drop the bag and empty your pockets. If you make it quick, maybe we won't carve you up. The twitchy man with the electric hands giggled, sparking a small arc of lightning between his fingers. Yeah, I want to see him dance. Let's give him a little shock first, Jean. Izuku's mind raced. What would a hero do? All Might would smash the ground, incapacitating them in an instant. Endeavor would create a wall of flame to push them back. Even a low-tier hero would have some way to fight or escape, but Izuku had nothing. He had no strength, no speed, no quirk. All Might's words echoed mockingly in his ears. Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. He was going to die here, or at least be severely beaten, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. He squeezed his eyes shut, raising his trembling arms in a pitiful, useless attempt to shield his face. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. Hey! I said drop the bag. The bladed man barked, lunging forward, his metallic claws raised to slash at the boy's jacket. Izuku braced for the agony, but the agony never came. Instead, there was a soft rustle of plastic. Excuse me, a polite, melodic voice chimed into the gloom of the alleyway. But I do believe bullying children is incredibly bad manners. The bladed man stopped, his claws inches from Izuku's face. The 3 thugs turned their attention to the entrance of the alley. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, peering past his trembling arms. Standing beneath the flickering light of the single street lamp at the alley's entrance was a woman. She looked completely ordinary, wildly out of place in the grim, dirty underbelly of Mizurifu. She was tall, with pale, flawless skin and long, raven black hair parted neatly down the middle. She wore a simple, elegant red turtleneck sweater tucked into fitted black trousers. Over her shoulder hung a canvas tote bag, and in her hands she carried 2 plastic grocery bags, the green stalks of leeks poking out of one. Her deep crimson eyes stared at the 3 men. Her expression was pleasant, almost vacant, like she had just asked for directions to the nearest subway station. What the hell do you want, lady? The boar-faced man spat, stepping toward her. Get lost before we decide to take your purse, too. The woman didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, a strand of black hair falling across her face. I was just looking for the butcher shop on 4th Street. My husband loves a good beef stew on Tuesdays, and Anya is quite picky about her meat. I seem to have taken a wrong turn, but, her gaze shifted to Izuku, and the pleasantness in her eyes hardened infinitesimally. I simply cannot ignore gentlemen who threaten a defenseless child. The bladed man burst into a cruel, hacking laugh. Gentlemen? Lady, you really did take a wrong turn. You trying to play hero? You wearing a cape under that sweater? He raised his metallic claws, pointing them at her. I don't care what kind of weak-ass quirk you have. Unless you're invincible, you're gonna bleed. Leave the groceries and get out of here, or I'll carve up your pretty face. A quirk? The woman blinked, seemingly confused by the term. Oh no. I don't have one of those. The thugs paused, then erupted into laughter. A quirkless bitch trying to play hero? The electric man cackled. Oh, this is too good. I called dibs on her purse. Izuku felt a surge of horror. She's quirkless too? The reality of the situation crashed over him. She was going to be killed. Because of him. Because she tried to intervene. Ah, run! Izuku screamed, his voice tearing from his throat. Miss, please. Run away! They'll kill you! The woman looked past the thugs, meeting Izuku's terrified green eyes. Her soft, red lips curved into a gentle, reassuring smile. It is quite all right, young man, she said softly. Then she set her grocery bags down on the pavement. She did it meticulously, ensuring the eggs wouldn't crack and the leeks wouldn't bruise. When she straightened up, the air in the alleyway changed. To Izuku, it was as if a physical pressure had suddenly descended upon the narrow space. The ambient noise of the city outside the alley seemed to mute. The temperature plummeted. The woman standing before them no longer looked like a lost housewife. Her crimson eyes, previously warm and polite, were now utterly devoid of emotion. They were the eyes of an apex predator. A creature that had spent its entire life steeped in the shadows of death. You're dead, lady. The bladed man roared, his ego bruised by her sheer lack of fear. He charged forward, swinging his metallic claws in a wide, lethal arc aimed directly at her neck. Izuku screamed. The woman didn't blink. She didn't take a fighting stance. She simply moved. It was a movement so fast, so impossibly fluid, that Izuku's eyes could barely track it. She sidestepped the lethal slash by a mere millimeter, the sharp wind of the blades ruffling her black hair. As the man overextended, carried by his own momentum, the woman pivoted on her heel. With a sickening crack, she drove the heel of her boot into the side of the man's knee. The joint shattered instantly, bending at an impossible, grotesque angle. As the man opened his mouth to scream, the woman brought her palm up, delivering a precise, open-handed strike beneath his chin. The man's jaws snapped shut with the sound of a gunshot. His eyes rolled to the back of his head, and he crumpled to the filthy ground like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly severed. He was unconscious before he even hit the pavement. Total elapsed time, 1.5 seconds. The alley fell into a deathly, stunned silence. The boar-faced man and the electric man stared at their fallen leader, their brains struggling to comprehend what had just happened. This woman had no quirk. She hadn't transformed. She hadn't used an ability. She had just moved. Jean! The electric man yelled, panic lacing his voice. He turned to the woman, his hands flaring with intense blue electricity. You crazy bitch! I'll fry you! He thrust his hands forward, sending a jagged bolt of lightning hurtling down the narrow alley. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, but forced them open, compelled to watch. The woman didn't dodge. Instead, she dropped into a remarkably low crouch, her flexibility defying human anatomy, the lightning bolt scorching the air mere inches above her head. Using her hands as a pivot, she launched herself forward, sliding across the damp pavement. She closed the distance in a fraction of a second, rising into the electric man's personal space. Too slow, she whispered, her voice a chilling, hollow breeze. Before the man could aim a second attack, she reached out. Her slender fingers didn't strike, they pressed. She tapped 2 specific points on his collarbone, and one at the base of his neck. The electric man gasped, his eyes bulging. The electricity sputtering around his hands instantly died. His body went rigid, paralyzed, a look of absolute terror frozen on his face. The woman gently swept his legs out from under him, letting him fall heavily to the ground, entirely immobilized. Pressure points? Izuku's mind raced, his encyclopedic knowledge of hero combat tactics trying to process the data. But the speed, the precision, that's not possible without a physical enhancement quirk. Only the boar-faced man remained. He backed up, trembling, his tough demeanor completely shattered. He looked at the woman, who was slowly straightening her red sweater, her crimson eyes locked onto him. And monster, the man stammered, turning and bolting toward the chain-link fence at the back of the alley, completely abandoning Izuku and his fallen comrades. He grabbed the fence, desperately trying to scale it. The woman let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. She reached down, her fingers grazing the concrete floor of the alley. She picked up a small, jagged piece of broken brick, no larger than a golf ball. She turned, her body coiling like a spring, her legs sliding back into a perfect, balanced stance. With a flick of her wrist and a terrifying, whip-like rotation of her shoulder, she threw the stone. The air genuinely cracked, a miniature sonic boom echoing in the confined space. The stone blurred, crossing the 30 feet of the alley in a microsecond. Thwack! The stone struck the boar-faced man squarely in the back of his right calf. The impact was so severe it sounded like a baseball bat striking a watermelon. The man screamed in agony, his grip failing as he plummeted from the fence, landing in a pathetic, groaning heap among the trash bags. The alley was silent once more, save for the muffled groans of the boar-faced man. Izuku was hyperventilating, his back pressed hard against the brick wall. He slid down until he was sitting in the dirt, his legs refusing to support him. He stared at the woman. She stood amidst the three incapacitated villains, completely unharmed, her breathing perfectly even. She hadn't even broken a sweat. Slowly, the terrifying, hollow aura surrounding her dissipated. The oppressive pressure in the air lifted. The woman blinked, and the icy crimson of her eyes melted back into a warm, gentle hue. She turned around, let out a soft gasp, and clasped her hands to her cheeks. "Oh dear!" she cried out, her voice returning to its melodic, slightly ditzy tone. "I threw that rock entirely too hard. I hope I didn't fracture his tibia. Lloyd is always telling me I need to modulate my throwing strength." She trotted back to the entrance of the alley, checking her grocery bags. "Oh, thank goodness, the eggs are perfectly intact." Izuku's jaw was hanging open. His brain was short-circuiting. The contrast between the lethal, cold-blooded martial artist of 3 seconds ago and the flustered, clumsy housewife standing before him was giving him severe whiplash. The woman picked up her bags and walked over to Izuku. As she approached, Izuku instinctively flinched, pulling his knees to his chest. Seeing his fear, the woman stopped a few feet away. She knelt down, placing her bags on the ground again, ignoring the filth of the alley on her nice pants. She looked at him, her expression softening into one of profound maternal warmth. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "Did they hurt you?" Izuku stared at her. He shook his head slowly. "That's good," she smiled, reaching out a hand. "It is not safe for a child to be out in this part of the city so late." "Where are your parents?" Izuku looked at her outstretched hand. It was pale and smooth, yet upon closer inspection, he could see faint calluses on her knuckles and fingertips. The hands of a warrior. The adrenaline began to fade, and as it did, the crushing weight of the day's earlier events came rushing back. The rooftop. The sunset. The symbol of peace telling him his dream was a fantasy. The dam broke. Izuku didn't take her hand. Instead, he buried his face in his knees and began to sob. It wasn't the quiet, frightened crying from before. It was a loud, ugly, heart-wrenching wail of pure agony. It was the sound of a child whose soul had been crushed. Yor Forger blinked, taken aback. She had expected the boy to be scared, perhaps in shock, but this grief felt entirely different. It was a deep, festering sorrow that had nothing to do with the alley thugs. She hesitated for a moment, then moved closer, gently placing a hand on the boy's trembling shoulder. "It's okay," she murmured, rubbing his back in slow, soothing circles, much like she did for Anya when she had a nightmare. You're safe now. The bad men are asleep. It's not that. Izuku hiccuped, his voice muffled by his knees. I'm not crying because of them. You paused. Then why are you crying, little one? Izuku slowly lifted his head. His face was a mess of tears and snot, his large green eyes red and puffy. He looked at the woman, this strange, terrifying, incredibly kind woman who had just defied everything he thought he knew about the world. He didn't know why, but he felt a desperate need to ask her. Maybe it was because she had said she was quirkless. Maybe it was because she had just effortlessly defeated 3 men without an ounce of superhuman power. Miss. Izuku choked out, his voice trembling. You said you don't have a quirk? You smiled gently. No, I do not. Where I come from, such things do not exist. We just have to rely on our own 2 hands. Izuku's breath hitched. He stared at her, his emerald eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. He found none. Just a calm, steady truth. The question bubbled up in his throat. The exact same question he had asked All Might just an hour prior. He knew he shouldn't ask it. He knew he would just get hurt again, but looking at the incapacitated thugs, looking at this ordinary woman who possessed such extraordinary power, he couldn't stop himself, even without a quirk. Izuku began, his voice breaking. He squeezed his eyes shut, preparing for the rejection. Can someone who is quirkless, can a normal person, become a hero? Can I save people, even if I'm born powerless? He braced himself for the pity. He braced himself for the gentle reality check. Be realistic. You looked at the boy. She saw the desperation in his posture, the way he squeezed his eyes shut as if expecting a blow. She didn't know what a pro-hero truly entailed in this society of capes and flashy powers. She only knew what saving people meant to her. She looked at this small, fragile, weeping boy, and suddenly, she didn't see a stranger. She saw a flash of messy black hair. She saw big, tear-filled eyes. She saw her little brother Yuri, shivering in the cold, hungry and scared, relying on her to protect him from a cruel, unforgiving world. You had not been born with a quirk. She had not been born with magical powers. She had been born with a desperate need to protect the one she loved, and the iron resolve to do whatever it took, even if it meant staining her hands with blood, even if it meant walking the path of the Thorn Princess. She understood this boy's heart. It was a pure heart, uncorrupted, simply desperate for the strength to do good. Ya's expression shifted. The ditzy housewife vanished, but the cold assassin did not return. Instead, what replaced it was a look of quiet, profound nobility, an elegance carved from years of discipline and sacrifice. She reached out and placed both of her hands on Izuku's cheeks, gently lifting his face so he was forced to look into her deep crimson eyes. Young man, you said, her voice steady, possessing a quiet authority that commanded the very air around them. Power does not make a hero. A quirk is nothing more than a tool. If a tool is broken, do you give up the task, or do you learn to use your hands? Izuku stopped breathing. His eyes widened. You do not need a quirk to protect people, you continued, her thumbs gently wiping the tears from his freckled cheeks. You just need the resolve to clean up the world. You need the discipline to forge your body into a weapon, and the heart to never let that weapon be used for cruelty. Izuku stared at her. The words were hitting him like physical blows, breaking through the hardened shell of despair that had encased his heart. You do not need a quirk. She didn't say it with pity. She didn't say it with hesitation. She stated it as an absolute, undeniable fact of the universe. Do you want to save people? You asked, her eyes piercing straight into his soul. Why yes, Izuku whispered, his voice shaking with the sheer force of his emotion. More than anything. I want to save people with a smile. I want to be someone who makes people feel safe. You smiled. It was a beautiful, terrifying, radiant smile. That is a very noble dream, she said, releasing his cheeks and standing up, smoothing out her red sweater. She looked down at him, extending her hand once more. If you truly have that resolve, you said, the wind catching her raven hair. Then I can teach you. I can teach you how to move. I can teach you how to strike. I can teach you the arts I learned to clean up the filth of my world. Izuku looked at her hand. This wasn't a hero. She didn't have a license. She didn't have a flashy costume, or a catchy moniker. She was a complete stranger who carried leeks in a plastic bag and hit with the force of a freight train. But as Izuku looked at her, he realized she was offering him the one thing no one else in his entire life, not his mother, not his teachers, not even All Might, had ever offered him: a chance. Izuku wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. His hands were shaking, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the terrifying, exhilarating spark of a reignited dream. He reached out and grabbed her hand. Her grip was firm, surprisingly strong, pulling him up to his feet. "And my name is Izuku Midoriya," he said, bowing deeply, a fresh wave of tears springing to his eyes, though this time, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. Please train me." You chuckled, a pleasant, melodic sound. "It is very nice to meet you, Izuku. I am Yor Forger." She picked up her groceries, balancing them carefully in one arm. "Now we should get you home. Your mother must be worried sick. And we have a lot of work to do." As they walked out of the dark, filthy alleyway and back into the glowing lights of Musudafu, Izuku looked up at the woman who had just altered the trajectory of his entire existence. He didn't know that the training he was about to endure would push him past the very limits of human biology. He didn't know about the poison resistance training, the bone-shattering flexibility routines, or the terrifying art of assassination he was about to inherit. He only knew that for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at the back of a hero he could never reach. He was walking beside a master who had extended her hand to pull him forward. The path of the Thorn hero had begun. The human body is remarkably adaptable. Given enough time, stress, and repetition, bone density increases, muscle fibers tear and rebuild themselves stronger, and neurological pathways optimize for efficiency. It is a biological marvel. 10-year-old Izuku Midoriya, however, did not feel like a biological marvel. He felt like a collection of bruised meat, stretched tendons, and shattered dignity. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Keep your breathing steady, Izuku." Yor Forger's melodic, cheerful voice echoed through the secluded clearing of the municipal forest on the outskirts of Musudafu. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, illuminating the dewy grass and the small, trembling boy currently being subjected to a medieval torture device disguised as a stretching routine. "Monsieur?" Izuku wheezed, his face entirely red, tears prickling the corners of his eyes. I think my leg isn't supposed to bend this far backward." "Nonsense!" He chimed brightly, gently but firmly pushing his heel a little closer to the back of his own head. "Flexibility is the absolute foundation of everything we are going to do. If your muscles are rigid, they will tear when you exert true force. A whip is dangerous because it is flexible, Izuku. Now, hold this for another 3 minutes. I will go make us some tea." She released his shoulders and trotted off toward the small portable stove she had set up on a picnic table, humming a pleasant tune. Izuku groaned, his face planting into the damp grass. Every single fiber of his being was screaming in agony. It had been 3 weeks since the alleyway. 3 weeks since All Might had crushed his dreams, and 3 weeks since the Thorn Princess had picked up the pieces. True to her word, Ye had begun his training the very next day. Izuku, fueled by a decade of pent-up determination and a desperate desire to prove himself, had shown up with meticulous notebooks, expecting to be taught how to throw a punch or lift heavy weights. After all, pro heroes were always shown lifting cars or shattering concrete with their massive biceps. Ye had taken one look at his notebooks, smiled warmly, and told him to forget everything he knew about fighting. Brawling relies on mass and momentum, she had explained, demonstrating a low, sweeping stance that made her look entirely weightless. "You are small, Izuku. You do not have a quirk to enhance your muscles to the size of tree trunks. If you try to fight like a brawler, your bones will snap before there's due. Therefore, we will not build a brawler, we will build a blade." The first month consisted solely of stretching, balance, and agonizing core exercises. Ye made him walk across a suspended log blindfolded. She made him hold unnatural, excruciatingly deep stances for hours until his legs shook so violently he collapsed. But Izuku never quit. Whenever he felt the urge to give up, whenever the lactic acid burned so badly he wanted to cry, he remembered the cold, terrifying grace of Ye dismantling 3 grown men in 1.5 seconds. He remembered the feeling of powerlessness. He grit his teeth, forcing his breathing to steady, relaxing into the agonizing stretch. Here you go, Izuku! A nice, refreshing cup of herbal tea to soothe your muscles. Yuri appeared, holding a thermos and a small ceramic cup. She poured a steaming liquid into the cup and handed it to him. Izuku sat up, gratefully taking the cup. His arms were shaking so much he nearly spilled it. Tea, thank you, Monsieur. He brought the cup to his lips and took a large gulp. The reaction was instantaneous. Izuku's pupils dilated to the size of saucers. His vision swam, the vibrant greens of the forest suddenly inverting into terrifying shades of neon purple and screaming magenta. His tongue went entirely numb, followed quickly by his throat. It tasted like someone had boiled a pair of unwashed gym socks in battery acid and garnished it with rusted pennies. A sudden, violent cramp seized his stomach. Izuku dropped the cup, clutching his abdomen as he toppled over onto the grass, letting out a strangled, gurgling noise. For a brief, terrifying second, Izuku hallucinated a tall, skeletal figure in a black cloak standing at the edge of the clearing, beckoning to him with a scythe. "Oh dear!" Yu gasped, immediately dropping to her knees beside him, her face a picture of maternal panic. "Izuku? Is the tea too hot? I used a special blend of mountain herbs I found. They looked very healthy. She found them, in the woods?" Izuku's mind weakly deduced before his consciousness faded into a merciful, agonizing blackout. Year 2, the biological crucible, age 11 to 12. Izuku did not die from the herbal tea, though he spent 2 days in bed with a fever that made his mother, Inko, panic and nearly call an ambulance. Yu had visited, bringing a basket of homemade muffins as an apology. Izuku, too polite to refuse his master, ate one. He immediately relapsed for another 24 hours. Thus began the secondary, unspoken pillar of Izuku Midoriya's training regimen, surviving Yor Forger's cooking. Yu was a kind, deeply caring woman who took her role as Izuku's mentor incredibly seriously. She frequently invited him to the Forger household for dinner after training. Izuku was honored. The Forgers were a lovely family. Her husband, Lloyd, was a tall, handsome psychiatrist with a calm, analytical demeanor that Izuku deeply admired. He often helped Izuku with his schoolwork, breaking down complex mathematics and chemistry with the ease of a master. Their daughter, Anya, was a quirky, energetic little girl who always stared at Izuku with wide, unblinking eyes. For some reason, whenever Izuku internally mumbled about his quirkless status or overanalyzed hero tactics in his head, Anya would look at him and say things like, "Deku's brain is too loud. It makes Anya dizzy." Izuku just assumed she was incredibly perceptive. But dinnertime was a battlefield. His cooking was, fundamentally, a crime against the laws of chemistry. A simple fish stew would somehow turn a violently radioactive shade of green. A roasted chicken would come out looking completely normal. But upon taking a bite, Izuku would discover the meat had the consistency of industrial rubber and tasted like sulfur. Lloyd and Anya had clearly developed coping mechanisms. Lloyd chewed with a stoic, thousand-yard stare, while Anya quietly fed her portions to their massive, fluffy white dog Bond, who seemed entirely immune to the culinary atrocities. Izuku, however, was far too polite. Whenever you looked at him with those sparkling, hopeful crimson eyes and asked, "How is it, Izuku?" he would force a blinding smile, swallow the biohazard whole, and declare it delicious. The consequences were dire. For the entirety of his 12th year, Izuku experienced a revolving door of food poisoning, violent indigestion, and mild hallucinogenic episodes. But a strange phenomenon began to occur. Around the time he turned 12 and a half, the sickness stopped. One evening, Yu served a dish she proudly called surprise meatball casserole. The meatballs were suspiciously gray and emitted a faint, sizzling sound, despite not being hot. Izuku ate his portion. He braced for the inevitable abdominal agony, the cold sweats, the vision of the Grim Reaper. Nothing happened. He felt entirely fine. He even went for a 5-mile run afterward. The next day in chemistry class at Aldera Junior High, a student accidentally mixed ammonia and bleach, creating a small cloud of toxic chloramine gas. The classroom was evacuated as students coughed, and their eyes watered. Izuku, who had been sitting right next to the experiment, didn't even notice the smell. He just sat there, meticulously copying notes until the teacher frantically pulled him out of the room. At the hospital for a routine checkup, The doctor drew Izuku's blood and stared at the vials in absolute bewilderment. His white blood cell count and immune system markers were off the charts. The doctor muttered something about Izuku's stomach acid being potent enough to digest raw titanium. Without realizing it, by surviving the sheer toxicity of Yor Forger's cooking, Izuku had artificially induced an extreme immunity to poisons, toxins, and venom. His biology had simply adapted to survive his mentor's affection. But his internal organs weren't the only things changing. By his 13th birthday, the soft, round baby fat of Izuku's youth had entirely vanished. He was still short, still unassuming in his oversized middle school uniform, but beneath the fabric, his body was undergoing a terrifying metamorphosis. His physical training was relentless. "Footwork is life, Izuku," he lectured one rainy afternoon. They were standing in an abandoned, waterlogged warehouse near the docks. "If they cannot hear you, they cannot track you. If they cannot track you, they cannot hit you." She challenged him to walk across a floor covered entirely in broken glass and scattered, rusted ball bearings. "Cross the room," she ordered. "If I hear a single crunch of glass, or the rolling of a bearing, you start over." It took Izuku 6 weeks. He learned to shift his center of gravity flawlessly. He learned how to roll his foot from the outside edge to the ball, distributing his weight so evenly that he could step on a fragile shard of glass without it cracking. He learned to silence his breathing, matching the rhythm of his inhalations to the ambient noise of his environment. When he finally crossed the room in absolute silence, moving like a ghost through the shadows, you clapped her hands in delight. "Wonderful! Now we begin strikes." That was when the true hell began. You did not teach Izuku how to throw a standard punch. She taught him anatomy. "The human body is remarkably fragile," you explained, drawing a crude but highly accurate diagram of a skeletal and nervous system on a chalkboard Lloyd had bought for them. "Pro heroes rely on overwhelming force to bludgeon their opponents into submission. This is inefficient and causes unnecessary collateral damage." She tapped the chalkboard with a piece of chalk. "A strike to the brachial plexus here will temporarily paralyze the arm. A precise tap to the vagus nerve here will cause instantaneous unconsciousness. A sweeping kick to the peroneal nerve behind the knee will collapse the strongest man on earth. Why break a wall when you can simply pick the lock?" Izuku's hyper-analytical mind devoured the information. This was his element. He had spent his entire life studying quirk mechanics and hero biology. Adapting that obsessive note-taking to human anatomy was seamless. He learned the pressure points. He learned the exact pounds of per square inch force required to shatter a clavicle, dislocate a shoulder, or crush a windpipe. Though you cheerfully reminded him that as a pro-hero, he should absolutely avoid the windpipes. Then came the kicks. Yu's signature fighting style relied heavily on her legs, utilizing extreme rotational torque and flexibility to generate physics-defying power. "Your legs hold the largest muscles in your body, Izuku," she instructed on the beach of Dagoba Municipal Park, a sprawling coastline that had been illegally converted into a massive, towering dump of rusted cars, appliances, and industrial waste. "By planting your pivot foot firmly, and utilizing the rotation of your hips, you can turn your leg into a battering ram," she demonstrated. She approached a rusted-out pickup truck half buried in the sand. With a casual, effortless sweep of her leg, moving so fast the air cracked, her heel struck the heavy metal bumper. Crunch! The entire front end of the truck crumpled inward as if struck by a wrecking ball. The massive vehicle was lifted 2 feet into the air before slamming back down into the sand, completely totaled. Izuku's jaw dropped. "Now you try," she smiled, pointing to a smaller pile of discarded tires. Izuku tried. He planted his foot, swung his hips, and kicked the tires. He immediately broke 3 of his toes. The pain was blinding, but you simply set the bones, bandaged his foot, and told him to try again with his other leg. For a year and a half, Dagoba Beach was his crucible. He kicked tires until his shins bled. He kicked rusted metal sheets until his bones microfractured and calcified, healing back thicker and denser than before. He kicked sandbags filled with wet gravel until his joints ached and his muscles screamed. Slowly, the weakness left him. His legs, previously skinny and frail, became coiled springs of dense, fast-twitch muscle. His flexibility reached supernatural levels. He could comfortably do a full split suspended between 2 chairs and bend backward until his head touched his calves. He was no longer just Deku. He was becoming a weapon. Year 4, The Mind and the Mean, age 14. As Izuku's body transformed, so did his presence in the world. At Aldera Junior High, he remained the quirkless pariah, but the dynamic had subtly shifted. Katsuki Bakugo still glared at him, still yelled, still slammed his hands on Izuku's desk with miniature explosions. But Izuku stopped flinching. One afternoon, during their final year of middle school, Bakugo cornered Izuku in the hallway. He was furious that Izuku still intended to apply to UA High School. "Listen to me, you quirkless nobody!" Bakugo snarled, grabbing Izuku by the collar of his uniform, his palms smoking, smelling of burnt caramel. "You think you can stand in the same ring as me? You're just a pebble in my path." 2 years ago, Izuku would have cowered. He would have stuttered, squeezed his eyes shut, and waited for the burn. Now, Izuku just looked at him. He didn't glare back. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply relaxed his muscles, letting his body go entirely limp within Bakugo's grasp. His posture straightened effortlessly, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, and he smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was a serene, polite, eerily calm smile. It was the exact same smile Yor Forger wore when she was about to dismantle an opponent. Izuku's emerald eyes, usually wide and expressive, went entirely dead. They bored into Bakugo's crimson eyes, void of any fear, void of any malice, void of everything. He stared at the pulse point on Bakugo's neck, his brain instantly calculating the exact millisecond he would need to strike it to drop Bakugo unconscious before the explosion could trigger. The air around them seemed to freeze. The ambient noise of the hallway faded. Bakugo stopped. A bead of cold sweat formed on the back of his neck. His instincts, the instincts of a natural-born predator with a powerful quirk, screamed at him. Every hair on his arm stood on end. His brain, unable to comprehend why, was flashing massive, blaring red warning signs: danger, lethal threat. Back away. Bakugo swallowed hard, the smoke dying from his palm. He slowly unhanded Izuku's collar, taking a subconscious half-step backward. "Kaken," Izuku said, his voice soft, melodic, and terrifyingly polite. "I understand your concerns. But I am going to UA. I hope we can both do our best." He bowed perfectly, a crisp 90-degree angle, and walked away, his footsteps making absolutely zero sound against the linoleum floor. Bakugo stood in the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs, entirely unable to process what had just happened. Izuku, meanwhile, walked home feeling conflicted. He hadn't meant to leak killer intent. You had warned him about that. When you train to dismantle the human body, Izuku, your mind alters its perception of the world, she had told him. You stop seeing people, and you start seeing targets. Weak points. Vulnerabilities. As an assassin, this is necessary. But as a hero, you must learn to sheathe that intent. A hero must project safety, not fear. It was a delicate balance. Izuku had the physical skills of a lethal operative, but the heart of a savior. Melding the two was his greatest challenge. Year 5, The Elegance of the Thorn, age 14.5. 6 months before the UA entrance exam, he invited Izuku to the Forger apartment for a special occasion. It wasn't a training day, and Lloyd had explicitly banned you from the kitchen for the evening, having cooked a magnificent roast dinner himself. After dinner, Anya dragged Bond into the living room to watch a spy cartoon, and Lloyd retreated to his study to catch up on patient files, though Izuku suspected Lloyd always gave them space on purpose during these moments. You led Izuku out onto the apartment balcony. The night air was crisp, the city lights of Mizurufu sprawling out before them like a blanket of crushed diamonds. Izuku stood beside her. He was nearly 15 now. He hadn't grown much in height. He was still on the shorter side, but underneath his casual t-shirt, his physique was carved from marble. It wasn't the bulky, aesthetic muscle of a bodybuilder. It was the lean, compressed, dense muscle of a gymnast or a martial artist. Every ounce of unnecessary fat had been burned away, leaving only functional, explosive power. You have come a very long way, Izuku, you said softly, leaning against the balcony railing, her black hair blowing gently in the wind. I owe it all to you, miss you, Izuku replied, bowing his head respectfully. You gave me the tools to pursue my dream. I gave you the tools, but you built the foundation, she corrected, turning to face him. Her crimson eyes were soft, filled with genuine pride. When I first met you, you were a fragile boy with a broken heart. Now you are a warrior. But, she paused, her expression turning slightly solemn. The path I walk, Izuku, the things I have done in the shadows to protect the peace, they are not the things a pro-hero does. I kill, Izuku. It is my job. It is my burden so that people like Anya can sleep safely. Izuku remained silent, listening intently. He had always known, in the back of his mind, what you truly was. The lethal precision, the knowledge of anatomy, the complete lack of hesitation when violence was required. She was an assassin. But to Izuku, she was just his master. His savior. You want to stand in the light, you continued. You want to save people with a smile, like your All Might. That means you cannot cross the line that I have crossed. You must possess the strength to destroy, but the discipline to only incapacitate. She reached into a long, rectangular lacquered wooden box resting on a nearby patio table. She opened it and turned to present it to him. Resting on a bed of dark red velvet were two golden weapons. They were stilettos, visually identical to the weapons you wielded as the Thorn Princess. A central ring designed to slip over the finger, transitioning into a long, golden shaft. Izuku's breath hitched. He reached out, his calloused fingers hovering over the gleaming metal. I had these custom forged for you, he explained, her voice carrying a ritualistic weight. Pick them up. Izuku slipped the rings over his middle fingers, gripping the hilts. They were perfectly balanced, heavy enough to carry momentum, but light enough to not hinder his inhuman hand speed. He looked at the blades and realized immediately what was different. They weren't blades at all. Unlike his stilettos, which tapered to molecularly sharp, armor-piercing points, the tips of Izuku's weapons were rounded and blunt, ending in solid, heavy spheres of reinforced tungsten carbide. The shafts themselves lacked edges, perfectly cylindrical and smooth. They are blunt, Izuku whispered in awe. They are, you nodded. If I strike someone with my stilettos, I pierce their heart. If you strike someone with yours, you will shatter their collarbone, crush their weapons, and trigger their pressure points with absolute, pinpoint accuracy. They are designed to disarm, to break, and to subdue. But they are not designed to kill. She stepped forward, placing a warm hand on his shoulder. You are not the Thorn Princess, Izuku Midoriya. You are something better. You are a hero. Tears, hot and fast, pricked Izuku's eyes. He gripped the blunt stilettos, the cold metal grounding him. He fell to his knees on the balcony, pressing his forehead to the floor in the deepest, most reverent bow he could muster. Thank you, Master, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. I swear on my life. I will never dishonor your teachings. I will use this strength to protect. You smiled, kneeling down to hug him. I know you will, Izuku. I know. The final test, age 15, 10 months later. The morning of the UA entrance exam had finally arrived. The sun was just beginning to rise over the ocean, casting a brilliant, fiery glow over the waves. Dagoba Municipal Park was completely empty, save for two figures standing amidst the colossal mountains of trash. The air smelled of salt, rust, and damp sand. Izuku stood at the base of a towering pile of debris. 10 paces in front of him sat a massive, rusted, double-door industrial refrigerator. It weighed upwards of 400 pounds, the metal thick and corroded from years of salt air exposure. You stood off to the side, her arms crossed, wearing a simple tracksuit. Today is the day, Izuku, she called out, her voice cutting through the sound of the crashing waves. Before you go to UA, you must prove that your body has fully integrated the lessons. Show me. Izuku didn't verbally respond. He simply breathed in, closing his eyes. He centered his weight. He felt the shifting sand beneath his red sneakers. He mentally catalogued the wind speed, the humidity, and the angle of the rising sun. He opened his eyes. The warm, anxious, nerdy Izuku Midoriya vanished. His emerald eyes locked onto the massive rusted refrigerator, cold, calculating, and utterly serene. He moved. To a normal human eye, Izuku simply disappeared from his starting position. The sand where he had been standing exploded outward in a massive crater, a testament to the sheer, terrifying kinetic energy generated by his leg muscles. He closed the 10-pace gap in a fraction of a second, moving so fast the trail of displaced air followed in his wake. As he reached the refrigerator, he didn't slow down. He planted his left foot into the sand, digging in deep to create an immovable anchor. His hips torqued with violent, whiplash-inducing speed, transferring the kinetic energy of his sprint up through his core, down his right leg. His right leg whipped around in a crescent arc, perfectly horizontal to the ground. A whip is dangerous because it is flexible, Izuku. His heels struck the center of the heavy, rusted metal doors. There was a deafening boom that sounded like a cannon firing. The shockwave of the impact rippled outward, kicking up a massive ring of sand and dust around them. The industrial refrigerator didn't just dent. It didn't just slide backward. The 400-pound cube of metal folded inward upon itself with a sickening screech of tearing steel. The force of the blow lifted the massive object entirely off the ground, launching it backward through the air like a discarded toy. It soared over the adjacent piles of trash, flying a full 30 feet before crashing down into the shallow ocean waves with a massive splash, sinking immediately to the bottom. Where the refrigerator had been standing, Izuku slowly lowered his leg. The air around his foot literally steamed, the friction of the strike generating intense heat. He exhaled slowly, a calm, steady breath. His posture was immaculate. He stood perfectly balanced, completely unfazed by the titanic exertion of force. Slowly, the killer intent faded from his eyes. He blinked, turning to you with a slightly anxious, hopeful expression, rubbing the back of his neck. Was that okay, monsieur? He asked, his voice returning to its normal, slightly high-pitched cadence. I think my form was a little sloppy on the pivot. I might have lost a few pounds of force. You stared at the spot in the ocean where the refrigerator had disappeared. She looked back at the scrawny, green-haired boy who stood before her, entirely unscathed. A radiant, incredibly proud smile broke across her face. She clapped her hands together joyfully. Perfect, Izuku. Just perfect. Your hips align beautifully. I am so proud of you. Izuku beamed, a massive, genuine smile lighting up his face. He looked down at his calloused hands, at his sturdy legs, at the blunt golden stilettos safely tucked into the custom holsters at his waist. 5 years of agony. 5 years of torn muscles, shattered toes, chemical-grade cooking, and relentless discipline. He was quirkless. He was a normal human being. But as he looked out at the rising sun, feeling the terrifying, beautiful strength coursing through his veins, Izuku Midoriya knew one thing for absolute certain. He was going to UA High School. And he was going to take the hero world by storm, not with an explosion. Not with a massive shockwave, but with absolute, terrifying elegance. The mirror in Izuku Midoriya's bedroom reflected a stranger. Or rather, it reflected the boy he had spent the last 5 years bleeding, breaking, and rebuilding himself to become. He stood in the center of his All Might-themed bedroom, a striking contrast to the grinning, brightly colored posters that plastered his walls. He was no longer dressed in his baggy, unassuming middle school uniform. Today, he wore the armor of his chosen path. It was a custom-tailored tactical suit, financed quietly by Yor Forger under the guise of an early graduation gift. To anyone else, it looked like a high-end, sleek hero costume. To Izuku, it was a masculine homage to the woman who had saved his life. The suit was a deep, midnight forest green, so dark it appeared black in certain lighting. It was constructed from a highly advanced, lightweight polymer weave designed to offer maximum flexibility without sacrificing durability. It clung to his athletic frame, highlighting the dense, coiled musculature he had forged on the sands of Dagoba Beach. The collar was high and rigid, framing his jawline, accented with subtle, elegant gold trim that traced down the seams of his torso. Around his waist sat a customized utility belt, resting comfortably on his hips. Attached to the belt were 2 perfectly fitted holsters. Inside them rested his golden stilettos, the blunt, heavy tungsten carbide weapons you had bestowed upon him. He wore flexible, sound-dampening combat boots designed specifically for the extreme rotational torque his kicks required, and dark, fingerless leather gloves to protect his knuckles. He moved his arms, twisting his torso. The suit didn't pinch or pull. It was a second skin. Izuku? Are you almost ready, sweetie? His mother's voice filtered through the door. Izuku took a deep breath, his chest expanding. He closed his eyes, centering himself. I am not a brawler. I am a blade. He opened his eyes, the anxious, wide-eyed fanboy retreating to the back of his mind, replaced by the serene, focused calm of a martial artist. I'm ready, Mom, he called out, opening his bedroom door. Inko Midoriya stood in the hallway. When she saw her son, her hands immediately flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, a genetic trait they shared, though Izuku had learned to heavily suppress his under his tutelage. Oh, Izuku, Inko whispered, stepping forward to adjust a non-existent wrinkle on his shoulder. You look so professional. So strong. Thank you, Mom, Izuku smiled, a gentle, polite expression. I'll do my best today. She pulled him into a fierce hug, mindful of the golden hilts at his waist. She didn't know the true extent of his training. She didn't know about the pressure points, the lethal arts, or the fact that his mentor was an underground assassin. She only knew that Yor Forger was a very polite, slightly clumsy personal trainer who had helped her son get into spectacular shape and taught him self-defense. I believe in you, Inko sniffled, stepping back. Show them what you can do. The commute to UA High School was a surreal experience. For the past 10 months, Izuku had barely interacted with the outside world outside of school and his training with the Forgers. Now, standing on the crowded commuter train, he felt hyper-aware of everything. His senses, honed by his extreme survival drills, picked apart the train car. He noted the man 3 seats down whose breathing was slightly elevated, likely late for work. He analyzed the structural weak points of the train's automated doors. He calculated the exact amount of force required to shatter the reinforced glass windows in case of an emergency evacuation. It was exhausting, but it was second nature. When he finally stepped off the train and walked up the sloping, cherry blossom-lined path toward the towering glass H-shaped structure of UA High, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He was quirkless. He was about to walk into an arena filled with teenagers who could summon fire, manipulate gravity, and tear the earth apart. And yet, looking at them, Izuku felt no fear. Compared to the oppressive, freezing killer intent of Yor Forger, these students were just kids. Out of my way, Deku! The familiar, aggressive snarl came from behind him. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head. He simply sidestepped with a fluid, silent pivot, allowing Katsuki Bakugo to storm past him without breaking stride. Bakugo paused, glancing over his shoulder. He took in Izuku's sleek, dark green suit, his eyes narrowing defensively. Ever since that day in the hallway, Bakugo hadn't touched him. His primal instincts, finely tuned by his own powerful quirk, still flared with warning whenever he got too close to Izuku's deceptively calm demeanor. Bakugo scoffed, turning back around and marching toward the gates. Izuku resumed his walk. As he approached the main entrance, a girl with a short, brown bob hairstyle and rosy cheeks suddenly tripped over a loose paving stone right in front of him. She pitched forward, a gasp escaping her lips as she braced for the harsh impact of the concrete. Before her quirk could activate, before she could even tap her fingers together to negate her gravity, the world blurred. Izuku moved. He didn't teleport, but his acceleration was so instantaneous that to the human eye, it appeared as if a few frames of reality had been skipped. He slid his left foot forward, dropping his center of gravity flawlessly. His right hand shot out, gently but firmly catching the strap of her backpack, while his left hand supported her elbow, perfectly distributing her falling weight. He halted her momentum instantly, righting her posture with a smooth, effortless motion. Are you all right, miss? Izuku asked, his voice melodic and polite, his emerald eyes warm. Achiko Uraraka blinked, entirely disoriented. 1 second she was falling, the next she was standing perfectly upright, held by a boy in a very intimidating suit who possessed the most gentle, serene smile she had ever seen. Oh! Uraraka stammered, a heavy blush dusting her cheeks. Wow! You move so fast. Thank you? I was about to use my quirk, but you caught me before I even could. It was my pleasure. It is bad luck to fall on the day of an exam, Izuku replied, bowing his head slightly. He released her gently. I wish you the best of luck. Without waiting for a response, Izuku turned and walked through the towering gates, his footsteps making absolutely zero sound against the pavement. Uraraka stared after him, utterly bewildered by his sheer elegance. Part 1: The Mind. The UA entrance exam was divided into two parts, a written exam and a practical combat test. Most hopeful heroes dreaded the written exam, assuming their powerful quirks would carry them through the physical portion. Izuku found the written exam almost insultingly easy. Sitting in the massive lecture hall, Izuku flipped open the test booklet. The questions ranged from advanced algebra and physics to hero law and situational ethics. For a normal middle schooler, it was collegiate-level material. But Izuku had not been tutored by a normal middle school teacher. He had been tutored by Yor Forger. Lloyd, operating under his cover as a psychiatrist, was secretly one of the greatest spies in the world. When Lloyd had offered to help Izuku study for UA, the man had applied his espionage-level analytical training to Izuku's curriculum. Lloyd had taught him how to decipher complex codes, how to rapidly calculate trajectory and velocity in his head to predict bullet paths, and how to memorize structural blueprints in seconds. By comparison, a standard calculus question about the arc of a thrown projectile was child's play. Izuku's pencil flew across the paper. His posture was immaculate, his spine perfectly straight, his non-writing hand resting politely on his lap. He didn't sweat. He didn't erase. He moved through the exam with the same terrifying, systematic precision he used to dismantle machinery on the beach. He finished the 2-hour exam in 45 minutes. He closed the booklet, placed his pencil down parallel to the desk's edge, and sat patiently, staring straight ahead with a serene, empty smile for the remaining hour and 15 minutes. The proctor, the pro-hero ectoplasm, found himself deeply unnerved by the green-haired boy who sat as still as a marble statue, not so much as blinking for minutes at a time. Part 2, the briefing. The lights in the massive auditorium flared as the voice hero, Present Mike, struck a dynamic pose on the stage. "Welcome to my live show, everybody." Mike screamed into the microphone, his quirk amplifying his voice to deafening levels. "Say hey." Silence echoed through the room. Izuku sat in the middle row, next to Bakugo. While the rest of the students winced at the volume, Izuku's face remained a mask of polite interest. You had once subjected him to a training exercise where she detonated flashbangs in a confined room while he was trying to balance on a wooden pole. Present Mike was loud, but he wasn't disorienting. Mike dramatically explained the rules of the practical exam. They would be dropped into massive, simulated urban environments, battle centers, and tasked with destroying robotic villains worth 1, 2, or 3 points. Suddenly, a tall, broad-shouldered student with glasses and perfectly combed blue hair stood up, his arms slicing through the air like a machine part. "Excuse me, sir. I have a question." The boy Tenya Ida shouted. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake." Ida then spun around, pointing a rigid finger directly at Izuku. "Furthermore, you, with the green hair." Izuku blinked, tilting his head slightly. "You have been sitting there with a disturbing, vacant smile this entire presentation. You are not taking notes. If you are not taking this seriously, then please leave. You are distracting the rest of us." The auditorium went dead silent. Bakugo actually grimaced, instinctively leaning away from Izuku. "You idiot," Bakugo thought, "don't poke the freak." Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't blush in embarrassment. He slowly stood up, smoothing out the front of his dark green suit. He looked at Ida. His emerald eyes were devoid of any aggression, but they carried a heavy, chilling weight that immediately made the taller boy's breath hitch. "I apologize if my demeanor offended you," Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent auditorium without the need for a microphone. It was melodic, calm, and utterly devoid of anxiety. "I assure you, I am taking this very seriously. I simply have a photographic memory. Notes are unnecessary. As for the 4th robot, if you allow Present Mike to finish his presentation, I am certain a school of UA's caliber has an explanation." Izuku bowed, a perfect 90 degrees. "Again, I apologize for the distraction." "Please continue, sir." He sat back down, his posture reverting to flawless stillness. Ida stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down his spine, a primal warning that he had just yelled at something very, very dangerous. He slowly sat down, muttering a flustered apology. On the stage, Present Mike's sweat dropped, the mood entirely derailed by the terrifyingly polite interaction. Yeah? Thanks, examinee 7111. The fourth robot is the zero-pointer. It's just a massive obstacle. If you see it, run away. Now get to your battle centers. Plus Ultra, Part 3, The Slaughter. Battle Center B was an expansive, hyper-realistic replica of a dense urban district. Towering skyscrapers, winding alleys, and broad intersections stretched out behind a massive set of steel gates. A crowd of teenagers stood nervously before the gates, stretching, hyping themselves up, and adjusting their support gear. Izuku stood at the very front of the pack, perfectly still. He hadn't bothered to stretch. His muscles were already optimized, thrumming with suppressed kinetic energy beneath his tactical suit. His hands rested loosely near the hilts of his golden stilettos. He heard whispers behind him. Look at that guy. What's with the suit? He doesn't have any support gear except those gold sticks. I heard he didn't even register a quirk on his application. Is he suicidal? Ida, the tall boy from the auditorium, approached him, a stern look on his face. I want to apologize for my outburst earlier, but I must warn you. Start. President Mick's voice boomed from the speakers mounted on the walls. The heavy steel gates groaned, beginning to slowly swing open. What are you waiting for? Mike yelled. There are no countdowns in real fights. Run, run, run! The crowd of students hesitated for a split second, processing the abrupt start. Izuku did not hesitate. Click! The sound of his combat boot locking into the pavement was the only warning. A sudden, violent gust of wind blasted backward, hitting Ida and the front row of students in the face, sending their hair flying. By the time Ida opened his eyes, Izuku Midoriya was gone. He hadn't run. He had launched himself. He crossed the 50-yard threshold of the gates in a little blur of dark green, disappearing into the city before the gates had even fully opened. What was that speed? Ida gasped, his own engine calves sputtering as he desperately tried to catch up. Deep within the city, Izuku came to a sliding halt at a four-way intersection. His boots left faint scorch marks on the concrete. From the alleyways to his left and right, three massive, green, tank-like robots rolled out. They were three-pointers, heavily armored and equipped with pneumatic missile launchers. Target acquired, the robotic voices droned in unison. Izuku exhaled. His eyes lost their warmth, the deep emerald frosting over into a serene, terrifying void. Analyze, Lloyd's voice echoed in his mind. Armor plating is thickest on the chassis. Joints are exposed. Optical sensors are vulnerable. Dismantle, his voice whispered in his soul. A machine has a nervous system, Izuku. Find the wires. Cut the strings. A three-pointer fired a volley of tennis ball-sized rubber missiles directly at him. Izuku dropped into a crouch so impossibly low his chest practically brushed the concrete. The missiles sailed harmlessly over his head. Using his hands as a pivot, he threw his body forward, sliding across the pavement like a striking viper. He closed the distance to the first robot in half a second. His hands blurred, gripping the hilts of his golden stilettos. In one fluid motion, he drew them from his waist. He didn't aim for the thick armor. He aimed for the pneumatic knee joint. With a flick of his wrists, possessing the precision of a master surgeon, Izuku drove the blunt, heavy tungsten tips of his stilettos straight into the exposed hydraulic hosing of the robot's leg. The impact was devastating. The blunt force ruptured the high-pressure tubes instantly. Fluid sprayed violently into the air as the massive machine's leg gave out with a deafening screech of grinding metal. As the robot fell forward, off balance, Izuku vaulted off its collapsing chassis. He launched himself into the air, spinning over the robot's head. As he descended, he swung his right leg in a brutal, downward crescent kick. His heel struck the robot's neck joint. The physics-defying torque generated by his hips transferred thousands of pounds of kinetic energy directly into the metal. The robot's head was literally sheared off its chassis, flying into a nearby brick wall and exploding in a shower of sparks. 3 points. He didn't even watch it fall. The moment his boots touched the ground, he ricocheted off the pavement, darting toward the second three-pointer. The machine tried to track him, its optical sensor whirring violently. Too slow. Izuku ran vertically up the side of a nearby street lamp, pushed off the metal pole, and descended upon the second robot like a dark green phantom. He crossed his arms, his stilettos gleaming in the sunlight. He brought them down, striking the dual optical sensors on the robot's face. The heavy, spherical tips shattered the thick glass lenses instantly, destroying the robot's targeting system. Blinded, the robot flailed its mechanical arms. Izuku landed gracefully on its shoulder, leaned down, and plunged his stilettos into the gap between its neck and torso, violently twisting his wrists. The blunt weapons hooked the main power cables. With a sharp tug, Izuku ripped the wiring out, instantly killing the machine. 6 points. He leaped off the falling husk, holstering his stilettos in midair. He landed in front of the third robot, which had finally managed to aim its main cannon at him. Izuku didn't dodge. He planted his left foot, dug his heel into the asphalt, and swung his right leg with the same devastating power he used to fold the industrial refrigerator on the beach. His kick met the barrel of the robot's cannon just as it fired. The sheer blunt force of his leg crumpled the steel barrel inward, sealing it shut. The backfire of the compressed air cannon ruptured the robot from the inside out, causing it to explode in a cloud of black smoke. 9 points. Total elapsed time, 8 seconds. Izuku stood amidst the smoking wreckage, his suit immaculate, his breathing perfectly steady. He tilted his head, listening to the ambient noise of the city. He heard the whirring of gears 3 streets over. He vanished again, a phantom in the concrete jungle. Part 4. The Observation Room. Deep within the bowels of UA High, in a massive, darkened amphitheater, the faculty of the schools sat before a wall of monitors. Nizu, the Chimera principal, sat in a high chair, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. Beside him sat the pro-heroes, Midnight, Snipe, Cementos, and the exhausted-looking Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa. Standing in the back, observing in his deflated, skeletal form, was Tashinori Yagi, All Might. They were monitoring the students, taking notes on their quirks, their decision-making, and their heroism. The crop this year looks promising, Midnight purred, tapping a stylus against her chin. That explosive boy in Center A has incredible destructive output, and the girl with the gravity quirk in Center B is utilizing her environment well. Aizawa grunted, his bloodshot eyes scanning the screens. His gaze suddenly stopped on Monitor 14, tracking a specific street in Battle Center B. What? Aizawa leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Camera 14. Zoom in. The technician in the booth complied. The camera panned wildly, struggling to keep up with the dark green blur ricocheting between the alleyways. The faculty fell silent as they watched the footage. A 2-pointer swung a massive metal claw. The green blur slid under it, vaulted off a parked car, and delivered a flying knee strike to the robot's midsection that caved the armor in completely. The blur then drew 2 golden batons, striking the joints of 3 surrounding 1-pointers with terrifying, rhythmic precision. The machines collapsed into heaps of scrap metal in less than 2 seconds. The boy landed, standing perfectly still, surveying the area with chillingly serene green eyes. Good Lord, Snipe muttered, adjusting his cowboy hat. Look at that speed. Is it a muscle enhancement quirk? A speed quirk? Pull up Examine 7111's file, Niza ordered, his beady eyes gleaming with intense curiosity. A holographic file popped up on the center screen. Name, Izuku Midoriya, age 15. Quirk, none registered. The room went dead silent. A misprint? Cementos asked in disbelief. That level of kinetic output is physically impossible for a quirkless human. It's not a misprint, Aizawa said softly. His eyes, heavily trained in the art of underground combat and quirkless martial arts, were tracking Izuku's every micro-movement. Look at his footing, Aizawa pointed at the screen. He's not using a quirk to propel himself. He's utilizing flawless anatomical mechanics. He drops his center of gravity, uses his skeletal structure as a fulcrum, and channels rotational torque from his hips. He's generating superhuman power purely through perfect physical technique. All Might stared at the screen, his sunken blue eyes wide with absolute shock. He recognized the boy. It was the frail, crying kid from the rooftop 5 years ago. The boy he had told to give up. The boy he had told to be realistic. Young Midoriya. All Might thought, his heart pounding against his ribs. What on earth happened to you? It's not just his physical strength, Aizawa continued, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and deep suspicion. Look at how he fights. He's not brawling. Most kids with strength quirks just smash the center mass. He's targeting hydraulic lines, optical sensors, and exposed wiring. He's fighting these machines as if they possess a human nervous system. Aizawa leaned back, his capture scarf shifting around his neck. Those are assassination techniques. Pure, unadulterated lethal arts, modified to destroy machinery instead of flesh. Whoever trained this kid is a master of the underground. Mizu took a slow sip of his tea, a terrifying grin spreading across his animalistic face. How fascinating. A quirkless boy who has turned his own body into a lethal weapon. Let us see how he handles true adversity. Mizu reached out and pressed a large, flashing red button on his console. Part 5, the zero-pointer. Izuku was currently at 68 points. He was standing atop a lamppost, having casually backflipped onto it to survey the area. He felt a light sheen of sweat on his forehead, but his breathing was still even. The exam was significantly easier than his Tuesday training sessions with you. Suddenly, the earth beneath the city began to tremble. The rumbling grew into a violent earthquake. Windows on the surrounding fake skyscrapers shattered, raining glass down onto the streets. At the end of the main avenue, the ground erupted. A colossal, terrifying shadow eclipsed the sun. It was a behemoth of steel and gears, towering over the 10-story buildings. Its massive red optical sensor glowed ominously through the dust cloud. The zero-pointer. The students in the area immediately screamed in terror, turning and bolting in the opposite direction. Run! It's the obstacle! Ida yelled, sprinting past the lamppost where Izuku was perched. Izuku analyzed the machine. Massive size. Slow movement. Heavy armor. No point value. Engaging is tactically unsound and inefficient. He prepared to leap to an adjacent rooftop and exit the hazard zone. But as he turned, his enhanced hearing picked up a sound over the grinding gears and crushing concrete. It was a gasp of pain. Izuku snapped his head back toward the avenue. The zero-pointer was advancing, its massive treads crushing the street. And there, trapped beneath a massive slab of fallen concrete, was the girl with the brown hair. Uraraka. She was struggling, her face pale, unable to reach the debris to use her quirk. The shadow of the massive tread fell over her. She squeezed her eyes shut, terrified. Izuku didn't think. The tactical, analytical mind of the martial artist vanished. The sweet, anxious boy who desperately wanted to be a hero roared to life, but he didn't run like a reckless child. He moved with the terrifying, lethal grace of the Thorn Princess. The students running away felt a sudden, violent vacuum of air pull at their clothes as a dark green streak shot past them, heading towards the behemoth. What is he doing? Someone screamed. Izuku hit the danger zone. The zero-pointer swung its massive arm, smashing a nearby building, sending massive boulders of concrete tumbling toward the street. To Izuku, they weren't hazards. They were stepping stones. He didn't slow down. As a massive chunk of debris fell toward him, he leaped. His boot met the falling rock, and he kicked off it with enough force to alter its trajectory, launching himself higher into the air. He defied gravity, ricocheting between the falling debris like a pinball. Left, right, up. His agility was supernatural, a terrifying display of spatial awareness and muscular coordination. He cleared the dust cloud, soaring 50 feet into the air, completely dwarfed by the towering robot. He was level with its massive, glowing red face. In the observation room, All Might gripped the railing, leaning so far forward he nearly fell over. Aizawa's eyes were wide, unblinking. Izuku hung suspended in the air. The robot's optical sensor whirred, finally locking onto the tiny human floating before it. Izuku tucked his knees to his chest, coiling his body like a high-tension spring. He didn't draw his stilettos. They were blunt, but they wouldn't carry enough mass to shatter armor this thick. He needed sheer, overwhelming kinetic energy. He closed his eyes. When you strike, Izuku, his voice echoed gently in his mind. Do not think about hitting the surface. Think about driving your heel through to the other side of the world. Izuku opened his eyes. The serene, polite smile vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated dominance. He uncoiled. He threw his upper body backward, violently snapping his right leg forward in a devastating, gravity-defying axe kick. His heel connected squarely with the dead center of the zero-pointer's heavily armored face. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, the physics caught up. The air around the impact point shattered, creating a visible, rippling shockwave that blew away the dust and shattered the remaining windows within a 3-block radius. A deafening, explosive boom echoed across the entire battle center. The heavy, reinforced titanium armor of the zero-pointer's face buckled. It didn't just dent, it catastrophically failed. The sheer blunt force trauma of Izuku's kick transferred into the machine's internal chassis, warping the metal, snapping the massive hydraulic supports in its neck, and utterly obliterating its central processor. The force of the blow arrested the robot's forward momentum entirely. The massive behemoth groaned, its red optical sensor flickering violently before dying out. Slowly, agonizingly, the titanic machine tilted backward. It fell, crashing into the foe city behind it with an earth-shattering rumble, sending a mushroom cloud of dust into the sky. Izuku was left falling through the air. The recoil of his kick had sent him tumbling backward. He didn't panic. He shifted his weight, spotting the arm of the falling robot beneath him. He twisted like a cat, landing gracefully on the sloped metal. He used the surface to bleed off his momentum, sliding down the arm, leaping from the elbow to a nearby rooftop, and finally parkouring down a fire escape to the street below. He landed on the asphalt with a soft, silent thud. He didn't even stumble. The street was dead silent. The dust slowly began to clear, revealing the decapitated, ruined husk of the zero-pointer at the end of the avenue. Ida, Bakugo, who had been watching from afar, and every other student in the vicinity were frozen in absolute, terrified awe. They stared at the boy in the dark green suit, trying to comprehend the physical impossibility of what they had just witnessed. Izuku stood up straight. He looked at the ruined robot, then quickly spun around, his lethal aura vanishing instantly. He jogged over to the slab of concrete trapping Uraraka. He gripped the edge of the boulder, his muscles bulging slightly, and effortlessly lifted the 3-ton slab of rock off her legs, tossing it aside as if it were made of styrofoam. He knelt down, his face entirely flushed, his hands waving in an anxious, flustered panic. "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" Izuku practically shrieked, his voice cracking, entirely reverting to his sweet, nerdy persona. "I'm so sorry. Did that scare you? I didn't mean to hit it that hard, I just panicked. Are your legs broken? We need a medic." Uraraka stared at him. She looked at the colossal, ruined robot in the distance, then back at the boy who was currently hyperventilating out of concern for her scraped knee. I'm fine," she whispered, utterly dumbfounded. You just... Time's up." President Mick's voice echoed across the city, a loud buzzer signaling the end of the exam. Izuku let out a massive sigh of relief, collapsing onto his backside in the middle of the street, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Oh, thank goodness. That was really stressful. Back in the observation room, the faculty was silent. Niza slowly lowered his teacup. Snipe pushed his cowboy hat up, letting out a low whistle. All Might was gripping his chest, feeling a bizarre mixture of immense pride and profound regret. Shota Aizawa stared at the screen, watching Izuku Midoriya frantically apologize to the girl he had just saved while dusting off his immaculate green suit. Aizawa narrowed his bloodshot eyes, a dangerous smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He's terrifying," Aizawa muttered. "He has the raw kinetic output of a powerhouse, the lethal precision of an assassin, and the anxiety of a golden retriever." Niza chuckled, a dark, amused sound. "Indeed, Shota. It seems our quirkless applicant has just secured the highest combat and rescue score in the history of UA High School." Niza looked closely at the monitor. "I look forward to seeing the thorn in our garden."